Let's turn now to President Trump and his top economic advisor, who are touting the status of the economic recovery. Here's President Trump and Larry Kudlow on Friday.
America's unprecedented economic recovery continues. You see what's going on. It's been pretty amazing.
These gains are very, very broad-based. There's still too many people out. There's still too much hardship, still too many unemployed. And we're working on that, and we're moving in the right direction. And that's why today's numbers are encouraging and optimistic. My view, of course, we are in a V-shaped recovery. It is a self-sustaining recovery.
Joining us now, former Treasury official, Morning Joe economic analyst Steve Rattner. So Larry Kudlow there is talking about the August jobs numbers. Steve, still going to the V-shaped recovery. I think they'll use that term come hell or high water. So what does it look like to you? Is it a V?
Well, they can call it a V-shaped recovery come hell or high water, but I think the facts are different. And you'll see here on this first chart that I brought that it doesn't quite look like a V. What you see here is an economy that was in free fall, particularly in the month of April, lost over 22 million jobs in a space of a little more than a month. And then you can see the beginnings of the climb back. And in May, 2.7 million jobs added, June, 4.8 million. But then the pace of job additions has slowed dramatically. In July, we added only 1.7 million jobs. And in August, these numbers that just came out on Friday were reported as 1.4 million jobs. But inside that, there are over 200,000 temporary census workers who will be off the payrolls in another month or two. And so, in fact, it was really 1.1 million jobs. So the pace of job recovery is actually slowing fairly dramatically. One other small point, which is the 8.4% unemployment rate that they announced is actually really 9.1%. The Department of Labor itself said there was something called a misclassification error, so that number isn't quite as good either. Now let's turn to this question of whether we're dealing with a broad-based recovery of jobs or something that is more narrow. And so what you can see on the next chart are the disparities in how different Americans have fared. And this is largely because this pandemic or this economic crisis didn't hit every industry equally. Obviously, things like travel, recreation, restaurants, and so on, where many lower income, people of color, women work, was hit disproportionately hard. And so you can see the effects of that on this chart, that if you are a black person, 11.2% of blacks have lost their jobs, compared to only 6.4% of whites. If you had less than a high school diploma, almost 19% of those folks have lost their jobs. If you had a college degree, you probably didn't lose your job at all, because virtually none of them have actually lost their jobs since this started. And then between women and men, again,
let me,
see
can
another disparity,
I stop you there for 1 second? Steve Rattner, forgive me for cutting in, but we're on a delay. And I just really want to underline this one number, and shocking. Let's keep this chart up. So the statistics, the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that if you have a college degree, that only 0.1% of people with college degrees lost their jobs, but almost 20% of people who have less than a college degree lost their jobs?
Sure, Joe. If you go to a restaurant and there's a busboy and a waiter and so on, maybe some of the waiters are out-of-work actors with college degrees or whatever, or you're in the kitchen, or you work at a theme park as a greeter or something like that, what kind of degree do you think most of those people have? And I would contrast that with the people who are on the set right now. I think all of us have college degrees, and all of us are still employed. And the folks in my industry are still employed. There has been very little job loss in the finance industry so far, in part because the stock market is doing so well. So yes, this is absolutely a recession and a recovery that is hitting people very, very differently depending upon their education, whether they're of color and whether they're a woman.
Wow. That's amazing. Let's go to the last chart.
Sure. And so then the question is, the president and Larry Kudlow were trying to tell us that this is going to be a very fast and steep road back. As we just saw, it isn't quite as fast or as steep as they keep saying it is. But we don't have a crystal ball. But one thing that we can look at to get a sense of what might happen are some announcements of layoffs. And so what you see on this chart is that a number of major companies have been announcing layoffs just in the last 2 or 3 weeks. United Airlines, almost 17,000. MGM Resorts, 18,000. American Airlines, 19,000. You see the airlines there in part because they got a $25 billion plus bailout. But that runs out at the end of September, and they will start to lay off people again. You see a lot of retailers and people like that on this list. And remember also that in the weekly numbers that we look at of new job losses, they're still running at close to 1 million, which is 50% higher than any week we ever saw before the pandemic. And so you do see this labor market starting to soften as businesses don't bring back everybody, and as the pace of reopenings slows. And on top of that, let's not forget my last point, which is that Congress still has not acted on a relief package. And so the $600 checks are over. The PPP is over. The airline aid is over. And so you're going to start to, I think, more layoffs as that filters through this economy. So there's nothing that, as we look ahead, there's nothing I see that says that sort of slow recovery I showed you in the first chart is suddenly going to accelerate.
All right, Steve Rattner bringing the data, bringing the charts. Steve, thanks.